Ilka Hoffmeister is the acting head of people and culture for Ericsson, Australia and New Zealand. She's a senior HR leader with experience across a number of industries, most significantly in tech. Ilka has a passion for helping all people thrive through great culture and great leadership. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ilka. I'm really happy to talk with you.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, Samantha.
I was hoping that you could start by telling us about your personal motivation and what drives your why in this area, because I know you've done a lot of work across your career around gender parity.
Yes, indeed. Look, I think it comes from an innate sort of compelling purpose to ensure there's justice and fairness for all people, including women. I just really feel passionate that we can all thrive in the right environment, and that actually we all have a collective accountability to help create that environment in organisations and in fact in our community, in society, in our families. So I'm super passionate about making that happen. I have a background in both law and philosophy. I studied gender studies, ethics, and so all of this just comes together for me in my role in HR, and particularly being in tech. You know, it's a fantastic opportunity to promote, gender equity in a sector that is typically male dominated, and it's quite challenging to encourage females and even girls in primary school to study those sort of STEM subjects, to get inspired and be interested in those things. And I think creating that longer term pipeline of females into the ICT sector, and then also into organisations they can thrive as leaders, tech leaders, people leaders, and to very senior levels of organisations. That's what I'm particularly passionate about.
Yeah, and so I know that Ericsson, as a tech company, are actually doing a lot of work in this area to try and increase gender equality, bring more women into their organisation, really doing a lot of work there. And you mentioned in a previous conversation that we've had that you felt really empowered at Ericsson to make change. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about the conversation with leadership and executive at Ericsson.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been just part of my wonderful experience in Ericsson. You know, I was immediately embraced, given my background coming from the sector, and I was basically given the platform immediately to do what needs to be done. And this platform was provided to me by senior male executives who are equally and authentically as passionate about female gender equity, and also about, making sure that we have a very positive culture and a positive employee experience for everybody. I think that what I felt was an immediate sort of obligation, and I felt really inspired to do things that Ericsson had already been doing really well, and just do really a lot more of it, and to penetrate even more deeply, have conversations that had been started that go into those areas of perhaps a little bit of discomfort for some leaders, and to have an open dialogue with them about, well, what does inclusive leadership really look like at Ericsson? What is a male ally? And let's have a conversation with some of our male allies, and let's invite people to ask questions. So I facilitated a session on male allyship with 3 key male allies, and that was just fantastic. The response we had from our people was really quite overwhelming. But I'm very passionate about the inclusive leadership piece, because I think that it's incredibly important that you have, positive affirmative action in gender equity. I think that that's critical. I think you've got to have your gender targets, you've got to track, you've got to have policies and practices that absolutely drive these gender equity and pay parity outcomes. That is absolutely a must-have, including in talent acquisitions, including through your whole employee life cycle, de-bias that cycle, including through talent and succession, and opportunities for leadership. This is critical. But I think underpinning all of that, it's incredibly important for the leaders, and particularly your senior leaders, to understand how they can role model inclusive leadership. What does it mean for them? They need to go on a personal journey. And some of that involves being quite open and honest with yourself, including for female leaders as well, particularly if, like me, you've grown up in male-dominated sectors. Yeah. It's so fascinating to observe your own behaviours and the way that you lead when you've basically been leading with men your whole career, which, to be honest, I've thrived in. But, you know, many women don't. So it's incredibly important to go on a personal journey. And this is what I found my executive leadership team were so willing to do and had done for many years. But this was now amplified. And we had the open conversations. And in particular, you know, it was great to have a conversation about what do women need. And there was comments, you know, help women have a voice. Make sure women's voices are heard in meetings, and it was so interesting because, you know, I reflected back, and then another female in the group reflected back. Well, we actually don't have a problem being heard, having a voice. You know, I'm particularly as sort of a strong, confident person. I've never felt that issue of speaking up. However, I've had other challenges, and I've had male allies help me in ways that might be, I suppose, not obvious. For example, I told a story in this session where earlier in my career, one of my key male allies, very important man to my personal development and professional development, there was a meeting, and I had said, I'd made a point, I'd made a clear, very good point that was going to be useful to progress us going forward in the work that we were doing. Mm-hmm. And someone else in the room who happened to be a male leader repeated the same point, but just slightly differently. And then all of a sudden, the whole group said, that's exactly right, and we should do it. And so that had happened actually quite a number of times in my career, but I just got used to it in some way. So I'd always then come back with, well, that's right, and, you know, focus on the outcome, not about the personal side of it for me, because I am very outcomes focused. But that leader, that executive leader, said quite clearly, and how is that different to anything Ilka just said?
Oh, that's so good.
Now, this was one of the most senior leaders of the organisation, and it changed the tone. It never happened again in that leadership team. It was one of the most empowering, you know, moments. And then I decided that in future I would call that out in a nice and sometimes humorous way, because I believe people are doing their best 99.9% of the time. And if they're not, I believe that it's likely to be because they're unconscious. Yeah. And so for me, this is why conscious inclusion and inclusive leadership is so critical, because it's about understanding your motivation and where are you coming from, and are you even conscious of what you're doing? And then I became conscious of that as well. And it's a personal learning every single day. Every leader, no matter how senior, will learn. In fact, sometimes the more senior leaders have to be even more conscious, because they've been given this authority and this platform, and they feel sometimes even more confident to be completely themselves. And so sometimes their EQ has to be in check. And I think that this is part of the conversation with leaders, to say, do you know your leadership impact? Do you understand how, you know, inclusive leadership is critical, particularly now post the pandemic? Your EQ, your ability to have conversations with people, to care about people, to put in place mechanisms so that all people can thrive, including women. This is even more critical. And in a tech company, this is fundamental. We drive innovation. We are the leaders in 5G. I don't want to sound like an ad for Ericsson, but in order to have this innovation, we need everyone to, as they say, I've heard it a million times, bring your whole self to work. Yeah. That includes every type of woman, every woman with every type of personality and leadership traits, you come to work and you deserve to love where you work. And you must have an environment that is positive and constructive, and that comes down to leaders. It's leaders who create the culture and capability of an organisation, and that's where the inclusive leadership side, I think, is really the key, particularly going forward in the new future of work, which we're already in.
Yeah. Yes, I love that story so much. I think that's amazing. And I also love how your knowledge of unconscious bias and inclusive leadership practices and diversity and innovation, all that kind of stuff, help you, first of all, not take things personally, because you're like, well, this is just unconscious behavior. People are doing their best, they just don't know better. But we can help them know better so it doesn't happen anymore. And then also really seeing the links between the kind of social justice aspect of it and wanting everyone to have a fair opportunities at work, but then also a very real link to performance, especially in industries where they need to have innovation and need to focus on growth and productivity.
Absolutely. And so this is part of my ongoing frustration as a leader in this space and as a female, is that the D&I and the gender equity and all of this, this is somehow made into some sort of soft skill. Well, it's not a soft skill at all. It's a human skill that is required and proven to drive business performance and outcomes. I don't need to go through the stats. We can easily do that post. There is so much research and data that supports inclusion for business outcomes. And I'm about performance. I'm about outcomes. A lot of my female leadership peers, they're about outcomes. They want to drive results, and we do that through people. We do that by leading and by creating the right enabling culture. And so in Ericsson, our focus has been really about creating that sort of speak up culture, but also then listening to people when they speak up, listening to females. And then there's a whole range of ways that we can lead and that different females lead. So I lead in a very different way than some of my female peers. It's equally as powerful. And so this is something that we have to understand, that at the end of the day, we need to make sure that everybody feels safe, you feel seen, and you feel valued. And this is critical. This is the philosophy for our Ericsson D&I. But we acknowledge that many females, and I acknowledge, they're not as confident, they're not as, as sort of got the voice that I am able to bring to a table quite readily. So a lot of females don't feel that way. And this is why, and a lot of men actually don't feel that way. A lot of groups that identify in different ways don't feel that way. And this is why it's imperative that our leaders are role modelling inclusive leadership, that we hear from them, that they tell their stories, they share similar experiences that I have, whether being male or female, and that we really build that enabling culture and we take action. We as Jerry Maguire says, show me the money. And this is why, it is absolutely critical that there are hygiene factors. It is a hygiene factor, pay parity. We review it every single year. In fact, it's ongoing. We have an ongoing process to ensure that women are paid equal to men. It's a basic. It's a basic that you have women in your talent pools, in your internal talent pools, and that you're developing them so that they can be the future leaders in the organisation, and that you make sure you have female talent at every position on your talent pipeline. These are just fundamentals because it just makes business sense. You need a diverse pool of people with diverse experiences and diverse perspectives. In Ericsson, we don't have a problem with cultural diversity. We are international. We have so many different cultures and experiences for people. It's fantastic. We're just so lucky that way. But there still are areas and groups where people identify that we are doing even more work to help people feel safe and feel that they belong. That sense of belonging is critical to an inclusive culture, and we've been experimenting. You know, we love to experiment. We're a tech company, but as part of our cultural growth, we're looking at, you know, how we encourage people to just try different things. And this includes inclusive leadership. So, you know, we've been running experiment workshops on technology, how we can use our collaborative technology better in an inclusive way. And this new hybrid way of working that we're now in, that we will continue in Ericsson, I'm so excited about that. We've got this unprecedented opportunity to now reshape how we work. And we need to make sure that we've got people working at home and we've got people working on in the office. How do we make sure all of our people feel included, including our women? Some women who may feel their voice is not heard, if they're the ones that are at home, how do we make sure they're not, you know, even less heard? So I think there are some biases that we had and that there are still there about people in the office. You know, you can manage their performance better. You know, you can see what they're doing. And, you know, one thing I don't want to happen is that we go back to old mindsets, old ways of thinking, that there becomes some sort of bias in the new way of working, that the people who are in the office, which may be, you know, mostly male colleagues, and we generally have mostly male technology professionals working with us, you know, that there's some sort of bias because they're there and some females choose to stay back at work from home. I don't think that will happen for Ericsson, but I because I know that we have, you know, over 3/4 of our people, men and women, have said they would like to work at home 2 to 3 days a week.
Quarters is huge, isn't it? Yeah.
It's fantastic, and you know, we're looking at how we can enable the full flexibility for everyone, and this is what I'm excited about, because I think pre-pandemic, working from home or being part-time, job share, sort of any sort of flexible working arrangement, I think it was associated with mostly women who'd come back from maternity leave.
Yeah, and the assumption that they weren't as ambitious and focused on their careers. But that's just not true.
It's just not true. In fact,
I really love the link you're making too between flexible work options and kind of like the ways of working of the future and the inclusive leadership piece, because I think people sometimes can look at them as separate issues, but actually what you're talking about being inclusive of everybody who's working at home or working part-time or using flexible work options means that everybody can be fully included, and you can also create a new way of working.
That's exactly right. And so it becomes less about, you know, how to accommodate a female who wants to come back to work from maternity leave. It becomes more about, well, everybody who wants to work flexibly and can work, and we've proven you can work just as productively, if not more, from home. The biggest thing that we have to do is get on an even playing field. And, you know, we've got a lot of women and men who are, you know, toward the end of their career life cycle, or who have people at home, the, you know, elderly parents they need to care for. This way of working is going to be so much better for so many people. And we just need to be just super inclusive in the way that we lead, because we need to understand people's individual circumstances and how we can help them. And this is where this EQ comes from, you know, why it's so important, and this underlying culture, and how leaders need to understand how they need to adapt their leadership and their mindset for this new way of working to really help people feel that they are working in the best way for them, and that it also works for the organisation. But I think we've got an obligation to make sure it just does work.
Yeah. Now, Ilka, I feel like I could talk to you all day about this stuff. I share your passion, and you just have so much amazing knowledge and background to share with us. But unfortunately, I have to stop us. But thank you so much for your time and being part of the Game Changers series with Work 180. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Samantha. Really appreciate it.